over the last 18 months when we had the pandemic, and obviously there were changes in terms of work. I suppose, what are you seeing at the moment, and how do you see that market?
Well, I think, we're definitely seeing that the pandemic has accentuated some trends that were already pretty well evident. I think, one of the key things is the use of technology. That suddenly, we were using technology before, but when people started having to work from home, we saw a rapid acceleration in the use of technology and people understanding how that could support more flexible working. And that's clearly feeding through into the situation we've got now, which I'm sure we're going to spend a lot of time talking about. But, what is the future of the office? What's the role of the office? And I think that the key thing, the parallel that we draw is that, people have now got a choice, just like they have between going to a physical shop or shopping online. People have now got a choice when they get up in the morning. Do I go into the office or do I work from home? And I think that's posing all sorts of questions that I'm sure we'll get into, but it's really challenging people to rethink what the role of the office is and to think actually probably harder about what that means for the office and for work policy.
We were talking about it earlier on, and the choice element of what you're speaking about, Nick, is the hybrid working. So which days am I choosing to be at home? Which days are most important? That, for example, if you have a family, that I'm there to support my family in that work-life balance. So it does present challenges, it does present its opportunities when going back to the market.
I think you touched upon the very crucial topic, work-life balance, and this is something we've observing. This is a top priority. It's always been, mostly in theory. These days, it's being implemented into practice, work-life balance, and this is, I think, which would be the major aspect of the future office.
So does this mean, we've been having conversations, obviously, a lot around nearly every sector. ESG has become a dominant part of that. So is that going to play the dominant role in the future? It sounds as though that's therefore going to be a dominant role in essence in terms of the future of office.
Definitely. This is the trend. It's been there, as you just said. We are observing the trends that's been with us for several months. But ESG, definitely the environmental part, and definitely what we've been observing with the events from the last couple of weeks, the transparency, ethical part of governance, corporate governance. This is something that's going to influence every aspect of the business, and of course also the office. In terms of environment, definitely people would like to spend time in a very sustainable space because those are the values they cherish, and we have to respond to new generation that value both environment and safety of the space. So ESG, definitely huge trend, and this is what we'll be focusing in the next decade probably.
And has that been accelerated, Danya, maybe to you, do you think that's been accelerated by the health crisis, or was that already happening? Where are we in terms of I suppose, the momentum of this?
Yeah, I am fortunate enough to work for a business that has offices and boots on the ground all over Europe, so it means different things for different jurisdictions. If you look at the Nordics, it's a method that's already adopted there, where there's more of that hybrid working style, perhaps because of the weather or just a cultural sort of awareness of what needs to happen in terms of this work-life balance. To your point, Richard, we were undergoing this trend anyway. We have increased use of technology anyway, and we've seen it over the pandemic in particular, where broadband becomes a major factor, as an example. And can we actually work outside of the office? It has been proved that it can happen because we've been forced to do that from regulation for a while. But actually, there's a real turn, I feel, in the winds that actually we want to get back into the office for collaboration. We want to get back in the office because we're in a people's business, and it's important to meet people, to eyeball them, to understand where they're coming from. There's a lot of skill that's attached, that's not spoken, that's sort of there in demeanor and attitude.
And it'd be interesting just to touch on, I mean, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday about, and I mentioned that we were doing the future of office, and they said, well, the interesting thing is that, for the last 2 years, actually the office has been residential, the residential sector, in essence, and so therefore, you've now got to really think about
Servicing,
service. Exactly,
yes,
yes,
yeah.
service levels
Yeah.
that you're putting in. So it'd be interesting to get everybody's perspective around that, around what that means, because obviously in terms of the development side, you've also got to be thinking about what services are going to be expected, not just now, but in kind of 5-10 years' time.
Definitely. I think that office space would turn more into a hotel space, so a lot of hospitality and wellness aspects. We have to accommodate those needs that are being met at home. So cozy space, comfortable space, space for self-isolation, sort of, but then also space for brainstorming sessions, a lot of creativity sessions. So definitely those would be the goals and the aims we'll be heading to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the trend the dominant trend that we've seen in offices over the last, I guess, 15 years is a shift towards more open plan working. And I think
you're increasingly seeing the big tech companies who are particularly, looking to attract specific talent, going down that route, and have been for a little while, I suppose. I mean, do you see that, who's in charge in a way? Is it that the employer's in charge in deciding what the employees do, what the office space is like, or is that increasingly being driven by the employee saying what it is that they expect out of an office?
Do you know, recently, and we all research and looking at the office market and dip in and out of media, the Great Resignation is something that's being spoken about an awful lot, because it becomes, well, what do I need? What's my expectation? And hopefully not being too demanding with that expectation. Am I actually getting truly what I need in regards to the preferences? Sorry, Nick, we were talking about that earlier on too, in terms of demographic, because you have that demographic coming through who are more choice-based than, dare I say it, for the older generation, who are more led by employers.
But I think that's absolutely right. But at the same time, there's a cycle here.
Yeah.
Think back to the dot-com boom. What's the image that comes into your head? Someone sitting there, probably on a surfboard with a laptop on their knees on the beach. The tie's dead, the suit's dead, no one's going to go into offices anymore. It's all about giving the kids what they want because they're the talent. Come the dot-com crash, funny enough, there weren't quite as many people saying, hey, you can go and work on the beach. It all went back to people wearing suits in offices. And so, right now, in most of the Western markets, we're absolutely at a point where, unemployment is back down to very, very low levels. Talent is in real demand, and so occupiers have to respond. But I do think that, looking at it as a sort of battle is a bit like looking at who's in charge, the occupier or the landlord. It's like, well, hold on a minute, we're providing a service to them. Yeah. It ought to be a collaboration, and I think there's overwhelming evidence that it is good. People need at least some time in the office, and some employees want a lot of time in the office. But there is absolute data, hard evidence, that the amount of time that people want to spend in the office is influenced by lots of things, but is directly proportional to the quality of the office environment as they perceive it. If you want people back in the office, you have to provide a great environment. Now, that environment will be different from one organisation to another. There's no one-size-fits-all answers. But if you provide the right environment, people love going into the office.
So it's always about a good product. Yeah. And definitely flexibility, what you guys just mentioned. So it's responding to employees' needs, I would say, because it's a dialogue, it's a collaboration. We're trying to create a culture of collaborative culture in the office. So we have to, also implement this collaboration spirit when we are preparing the office, and the flexibility part is something we're observing. And me being a lawyer and negotiating all those deals with tenants, with investors, we have to accommodate both needs, but definitely flexibility is something they want. They want to have a choice in terms of how many people will they employ in future, and they want to be prepared for it. It's not about staying at home anymore. It's about creating a culture and approaching new people and approaching new talents.
Go ahead, Danya, if you want to.
No, I was just going to give a stat on that, and Nick, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure, because you have all the answers,
all the info.
2.7 million more workers across Europe in the next decade, on top of what's already existing, right? With employees working for longer, it does come down to needs, to your point, and flexibility.
Just picking up on one thing that Karolina said, which I think is absolutely true, that it's about facilitating collaboration. At the same time, I think the one thing that you hear talked about a lot is that we need to get people back into the office so that they can collaborate, and a sort of sense that we need to turn the office into some kind of suit-wearing nightclub where there's party zone and everybody madly collaborating. So you'll do your non-collaborational work on Monday and Friday, because that's when we're all going to work from home, and then Tuesday to Thursday it's into the office and collaboration city. And I think that that's completely unrealistic in terms of the way in which people's lives work. Even in a day when you are in the office for meeting, you still need quiet time. And again, back to the reason why many flexible working, sort of hot desking, open plan environments don't work, is because it's not necessarily a great environment for the quiet, focused work that they want to do. And again, data shows that even in the best offices, one of the features of office space that is most criticised, and one of the things that people like most about working from home, is the ability to work in a quiet, focused way without distractions. And alongside the nightclub and the table tennis table, have you ever tried working next to someone playing table tennis in the office? It's a nightmare. But alongside those facilities, we need to really focus on providing really good quality, quiet focus time, because that's what people really miss in a lot of office space at the moment. And was what a lot of people found when the old cellular office days. There were reasons why people had cellular offices, and some of those are important.
And do you think there's going to be a change in terms of location? Because obviously we've had discussions before about hub and spoke systems where you've got a central office here and then different satellite offices around, and there was a lot of talk about that at the start of the kind of pandemic, that would be expected and there would be therefore a boom in smaller cities. Are we going to see any of that? Is that something that's realistic, or is it that's just one of the things that people thought would happen but actually isn't going to?
I would say it's all about communication in terms of transport. So unless our location is well communicated, there is no need to change the location from outside of CBD. Definitely, it's very valuable both for the employers as a location of its business in terms of PR and strategy, but also for investors. So we don't expect any change in that respect. Maybe in major, huge agglomeration where commuting is an issue, but not necessarily in our, I would say, smaller cities. And of course, I'm speaking about Central Europe. I assume you may say something about London, probably because commuting is quite
known to be
hardship.
challenging, is the way that we would put it diplomatically. What I would say is, for all the reasons being in the office, there are reasons being around the office, such as I work in the West End. I'm fortunate enough to do so, and there are spaces that you could meet with partners. There are the restaurants, there's the vibe, the dynamic about it, right? So I love where I work, because not just for the office, which is a fantastic ESG-focused office with living walls and so on, but just it makes it easy to connect with people because it's known for that connectivity. If you were going to, I know the jury's still out on the spokes and the suburban offices, but really, from my perspective, if you think about it, depending on how close you are to that suburban office, maybe you need to drive to it. Okay, it might be a shorter drive, but you'll have to get there. And how many employees do you have going into that space, right? So, and again, it doesn't have the same level of connectivity that a CBD office would have. So again, I'm going to sit on the fence on that one, but for me, I enjoy going into the office in a CBD territory.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think, the jury's still out is absolutely how I describe it, that in terms of the hub and spoke thing, again, there's no one, it depends on the organisation. I have to say, I think probably we're more likely to see a more rapid expansion, certainly early on, of flex and serviced office operators. That one of the things that we may well find people doing, because of course not everybody can work from home. I'm really lucky we've got a nice house and I could, and I haven't got young children running around, but for a lot of people that's not an option. So how do you give that flexibility to people? Well, we're already seeing some of the big banks doing deals with some of the global serviced office operators, so they say to their staff, right, here's your card, here's the map of or the website with where they've got offices, you can go and work where you want. And so I think that the expansion of those flex networks we could well see to support that.
And I think you would have to be, in order to support that fully, you would be a employer of scale. As an example, is one of the dynamics or the component parts that you would put together as to whether or not that may work.
But you can
it's
easily
there.
imagine.
But it's there. You can manage it. Yeah.
Absolutely, you can. Stick the postcodes of where your employees live into a GIS, and even if you're a single, UK company or a, Polish company, you can see where the people live. And I think the move out to potentially to smaller cities, I think, is a very interesting one, because I think I know quite a few people who during lockdown ended up, going home. So they moved well outside London to a completely different part of the country. No one knew. I mean, what did it matter if, I might be 10 miles outside London, you could be 400 miles outside, doesn't make any difference, does it? We're still on a team score. And what it showed was that, where there is a will, you can make that work. If we both need to be back in the office for a meeting on Monday, well, that's fine, that's a judgment that we make.
Yeah.
But I do think, going back to the point about sort of wellness, lifestyle, work-life balance, being able to facilitate people, valued employees who want to make that kind of choice, I absolutely think that lifestyle cities, whether at a European level or at an individual country level, lifestyle cities could well benefit quite significantly.
So it all comes down to the cost benefit of so doing from an employer perspective, coming back to the scale and saying it could work with certain circumstances for sure, because there is a cost benefit to doing so.
And I was interested, Danya, as well, where you mentioned there about, one of the reasons why you liked your office was because of its location, which is in the West End. And it's interesting to see, what was previously retail on Oxford Street being converted into office, which you wouldn't have seen before because it wasn't really an office location. So do we think that sort of, kind of mixed use, I suppose, more than there being this is downtown, lots of bright, shiny offices, that actually we're going to have more of that. Here's a really vibrant area, and we're going to have office here because that's part of a lifestyle that people want. Going back to that point that you had about how to attract people to the office and make it somewhere where they want to go.
Yes, and just to support what you're saying and describing and what I've spoken about earlier on, it isn't just the office. It's the, dare I say it, the community that's around that, and the talent that's there too. Right? Can you meet people across an industry or industries and collaborate and have that diversity of thought? I do think there is something to be said with. Not just offices. There's some commercial. There's some restaurants. It does create a buzz in the area for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this links into all the discussion about the 15-minute city. The idea that you should be able to access all of the things you need in order to live and work from within 15 minutes of where you live. And I think it. There again, we've done work in the past looking at. The types of performance that you get out of real estate markets at a micro level, and conventionally the way we do things is sort of cut things up into sub-markets, and then we look at the value changes in those sub-markets for office. if you take a step back and allow the data to talk, so if you plot, what's the mix of uses at quite a micro level, and let the data tell you where are the concentrations of places, and then look at that relative to rental growth, actually, places that have got a very wide mix of residential, retail, leisure, and office space.
See the rental growth.
They outperform.
Yeah.
Because people like working in those kinds of environments.
And are we going to see more? I mean, are we going to see more repositioning of existing buildings versus kind of new development? I mean, coming from that ESG side, just a changeover in perception, I suppose. And I don't know whether that'll be driven by the occupiers or the investors ultimately, but there's certainly appearing to be less focus on demolish, rebuild maybe on, build on something that is a brownfield site, for example, where there's something that's different. But do we think there's going to be more of a focus on that sort of rebuild rather than the brand new offices, I suppose?
It's one of the trends. Definitely, that would require adjustment towards the environmental requirements. This is something crucial. And of course, it gives you, connecting to what you just said, this kind of vibe. Yes, we want to create communities and not only create soulless offices, but also put some spirit into the office. So definitely, Williamsburg in New York City comes to my mind. It's a refurbished area which is lively and amazing, and I think that would be something that certain businesses would require. Not every single business. I assume maybe investment funds wouldn't be so happy to sit in a refurbished office, but definitely some IT business, some people who are, I don't know, from media agency, etc. Those who have creativity embodied in their work life. So definitely.
And of course, this is going to differ across different areas as well. So, for example, in CE, where there's less office buildings, and so therefore that product has to be developed, if you like. That's different to some of the larger markets where there's a lot of office, particularly Paris, for example, which was built in the 70s. So it's quite different across those different regions, I think.
I mean, but back to your original question, we absolutely need to focus on reusing. It's the same as sort of recycling with our, waste at home. We absolutely need to focus on reusing buildings. Nothing is more lunatic than knocking down an old building because it's not energy efficient and then building a new one that is energy efficient. Because the impact that you have on the environment through that demolition and construction process is almost certainly dwarfs the differential in the energy performance of the building. And so this is where, thinking about carbon accounting and particularly around embodied carbon, how do we avoid further impacts is absolutely crucial. And at the moment, there is no clear guidance, there's no clear understanding as to how we should do that, but it's going to be a key part of setting legislation and regulations to try and make sure that we don't inadvertently encourage people to do things that are in fact the opposite of what we're trying to achieve.
And we're talking about the future of office, but is some of that future also that there will be stranded assets that actually we can't do much about, talking about being able to transform them to something that does meet that criteria, the ESG criteria? Is that what we're...
Yes. Yes, I think there will be. If you look at the direction that the UK government's going, and there isn't exact clarity on how this is going to work, but the work that you're going to be required to do to the building, there are exemptions if they're not, if the works are not feasible or not viable in terms of the payback period from energy savings, you won't have to do the work. So, again, there will be an attempt to try and make sure that, we keep, buildings in productive use for as long as possible, because the longer the productive use of an individual building, the less you have to build, so the less the impact. But there will absolutely be stranded assets. That's certainly from a value point of view. that's exactly what the governments are going to try and achieve, because it's trying to avoid that forces owners to do the work in the first place.
And the older the assets, of course, the more work, right? So from an investment standpoint, of course, the return does get hit, and what do we need? So just back to the earlier question, is demolition there? Hopefully not, but for some assets, yes, it's a necessity, I think.
Yes, but then we have to choose wisely, since construction business is responsible for 40% of carbon footprint. So there's a huge responsibility over our shoulders. Definitely, we have a saying in this game. So definitely choose wisely and be responsible.
And does that mean that increasingly in terms of the development side, that you're going to be using either more technology or modern methods of construction, or different types of concrete, more timber, those kinds of things? I mean, those are areas obviously where one can also ameliorate slightly the sort of effect.
Oh yes, definitely. Carbon neutrality is something that is the biggest driver in construction business these days. Paris Agreement, certain companies have very ambitious goals. It's not 2050 anymore, it's either 2040, 2037. So it's something that has already been so deeply embodied in a business strategy, complying with carbon neutrality, and definitely new materials, new ways of productions, energy sources. That would be something which has the biggest impact on this business.
And Richard, at Cromwell, we have been out in the media previously, and now we're developing a wooden buildings fund. So just to your point of more ESG focused and environmental, working with the best in class in terms of CLT and the wood products in order to build ESG focused investments, which will fit into our fund, and that spans across geographies, across Europe, and across sectors also.
There was a lot of focus, around what you mentioned, Nick, in a way, which is people leaving areas like London and moving outside of that, and a fear at the time that would then lead to London becoming less of a popular office location. But I'm guessing what we're saying really is that because London and other cities like Paris, like Warsaw, are vibrant, interesting cities, then actually not much is really going to change in terms of the locations, really. That if those big buzzy cities are still big and buzzy, then that's where offices will be.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the idea that London and New York are going to become deserted wastelands because everybody's moved out to the burbs, I think is somewhat unlikely. And if you're arguably that potentially those markets could strengthen, because if you're only commuting 2 or 3 times a week as opposed to 5 days a week, and you don't have to do it on a Monday morning, which is the one that we all really hate, and then arguably are people going to be more willing to take a longer commute in order to get in, because once you're there, you say working the West End's fabulous. Downtown New York's a great place, really buzzy environment. So no, absolutely. I don't see those weakening at all.
Okay, good. Any questions? It might be interesting, Jake, as well. Because I know you're based out of CE as well, and in terms of the centre that you're running there, have you had to adjust that strategy over the past 2 years of the pandemic, in terms of services that you're putting in, whether that's outside space, do you know what I mean? Have there been changes? I'll wander over to you. There we go.
All right, put me on the spot. Thanks, Rich. Well, it wasn't rehearsed, this. It's a relatively new complex, because it's 10 years since we started it, and it's a campus. So the evolution through the project, we've delivered a building, one building per year. So we've kind of followed the trend as we've sort of built up the campus. So there's been a sort of an accent change, building by building, and the last buildings have kind of been delivered just before the pandemic. But we were fortunate enough to have great advice at the very beginning from the UK and the US that was really focused on people. So we were doing that back in sort of 2009 when we started the designs. In 2011, when we delivered the first building, it was already with that concept. We called our tenants residents. And from there, everything filtered down, and we had concierges for the buildings, and it all just it kicked off in 2011. So we were quite early, in that whole kind of concept of providing spaces for creative collaborations and all of these kind of nice buzzwords. And then that kind of made the project sticky. So when we got to COVID, essentially, a lot of the Polish workforce, they were coming into work anyway. But a lot of our international companies, the work was actually better. The office environment was actually better than actually, what they had at home. So we have clubs and social programs and everything else, and it was kind of, a way for them to kind of just sort of be engaged. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the population from those companies, that they left the office because they were told by their headquarters in New York or London, where the situation was a bit sort of more difficult, to stay at home. Whereas the office complex was quite big and large and safe for them to be in. So there was some sort of transition, let's say. But now everybody's back, and we've had to sort of install some new technologies. To do the well certification, to sort of upgrade some of the filtering of the air, HVAC and stuff like that. So there have been some changes, but generally, we've been sort of quite lucky to come out at the end of it and sort of learn from it, but now we're better for it.
Okay, good. Thanks, Jake. And sorry to pick on you, but but I thought it was interesting just to see what changes you've been seeing there. So I suppose it would be interesting just to see. I mean, I'm often minded that we often react hugely to everything and think there's going to be a massive change, which then subsequently there isn't. And particularly at 9/11, when everybody said that's the end of high-rise, there'll be no more high-rise buildings. That was about 6 months maybe, or a year possibly, and then the largest office in the world, then it all changes. So is some of this, some of the things that we're talking about really going to happen, or are we, if we enter some sort of economic downturn, will then suddenly employers say, okay, now everybody's got to be back in the office wearing a tie, everybody, do you know what I mean? There's that this might be a short-term thing, but actually will revert back to the norm.
I personally, I think there'll be some of that. Some of it is cyclical, depending on where the balance of power lies, if that's the way you want to look at it. But using your 9/11 example, which I like, I've used it in the past as well, it's absolutely true that people have gone back into tall buildings, but you don't go and knock on the door and be able to sit up front with the pilot anymore. Which when I was a child, you did. Going through airport security is not the same as it was pre-COVID. And the point is that, yes, absolutely, there are some things that people think, that's over, and actually things go back to normal. But we also learn. There are some things that, so for example, giving people the flexibility to work when and where they want, so they can be as productive and efficient as possible, and understanding that means that you have to manage them, not using a clocking in and out system. If they're at their desk, they're doing well, and if they're not, where are they? But manage people by results. Those things, I think, will change because it makes for better business and better businesses.
And I also think, I like your analogy, actually, of the pilot and not being able to access it because yes, there will be an element, from my opinion, of we will be heading back to the office a little bit more. And what does that mean? Because we need to be collaborative, for sure, all of the reasons that we gave earlier on. But I think we're changed out of COVID, actually. I think fundamentally COVID has been an extended time more than we even thought it would be. And with that comes a change in thought and what is it that I actually need and want. So I do think we're changed. And then just coming back to something we spoke about earlier, which is the megatrends. It was happening anyway with increased technology and efficiency in that regard. And also we have a new generation coming up who are, let's say, more demanding, dare I say it, I have teenage kids, so are more demanding when they go into the workplace. They'll have for want of another phrase, a better idea of what they want and need to get out of it.
If they're anything like my children, they've got a shock when they get into the workplace because their entitled approach to life doesn't always work, even if you are trying to help keep them flexible and efficient.
I think what pandemic has done, it has accelerated those trends. They were already here. They're associated with technology, with new generations coming. So definitely good comparison to 9/11, though slightly different in terms that it's going to stay with us.
And it's interesting, is Teams and all of those were all available before, but just people didn't use them. So is that kind of offices technical disruption in a way like e-commerce was for retail? Is there really no way back from that because people have got used to it and it's so easy?
Do you know, I would actually say it's a mixture because we all have Zoom fatigue, right? And Teams fatigue. And it's got to be a mixture because, example, in my job, we are geographically spread out, so there is no other use, all right? We have to use Teams if we're not physically together in person just because of where people are based and resourcing are based. But there's a lot to be said for let's grab a coffee, right, in the office. And a lot of social capital that's built up in order to facilitate a better working, more collaboration, and all of that good stuff.
We ran an event for our clients yesterday, similar to this, and two of our colleagues from the UK weren't able to be there. And so, as part of the discussion, we had them on a video conference call. They were up on screen and they were able to take part in the discussion and answer some of the questions that were being posed. So that was fantastic. At the same time, what we're finding is that when we're partly back in the office, actually it's really challenging doing a half and half. When everybody's on a Teams call, it's fine.
Yeah.
When you've got half the people who are sitting there, trying, we've all done it in the old telephone conference days, trying to get into the conversation, and if the collaboration is strong in the room and everybody's bouncing ideas off each other,
you're not feeling some of it because you're just not there in person.
Absolutely.
Physically.
So again, it depends what you're trying to do. Technology isn't a substitute, as you say, for
human touch.
If something needs to be done in the room, it needs to be done in the room.
Yeah.
But equally, we're going to find a lot more ways of doing a lot of that using technology where it makes sense.
Yeah.
People aren't going to be flying across the Atlantic as often as they were in order to do a couple of meetings in New York. It doesn't make sense.
And I suppose here's an idea. How about we have a tech MIPIM, right? It just wouldn't work, right? We're here in person, and most of whom everyone, actually, not most, everyone's delighted to be here. First time in a few years. And you couldn't do this tech-focused. You need to be with people. It's a relational business.
Well, you don't bump into people that you worked with a long time ago randomly when you're on a Teams call and go, "Hi Pete, how are you? I haven't seen you for years, and we're going to go and catch up in a minute." So.
Yeah.
No, that's great. So I'm conscious that therefore you need to go and catch up. So let's not. So I suppose last kind of point, key trend for each of you, which is allowed to be the same if it is the same. And I suppose what does that mean in terms of the opportunities for investors looking at this space? Should we start with you, Danya?
Key trend in terms of offices, more CBD, ESG focused. With all that's going on in the world currently, I think there's a more focus on, dare I say it, Western Europe, and a real requirement for a lot of investor portfolios, for sure, with an ESG focused approach.
I would also go with ESG, definitely. I would say also security, in terms of health security and providing comfort in the office for employees, and then maybe environment to sort of highlight that from ESG. But this definitely would be a trend and huge focus.
Okay, great, Nick.
An end to people thinking that the modern office, you can put in 4 meeting rooms, a load of open plan desks, a kitchenette, and you're done, because they'll work it out. There's going to be a real focus on data-driven focus on actually understanding what makes the office work for your particular organisation and really working to create the right asset, the right space for you and for your people, rather than the kind of cookie cutter approach that we've had up until now.
Great, really interesting discussion. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll pick this up again, and maybe we'll try and redo the exact same panel next year at MIPIM and see whether or not we were right on some of those, and see what's happened in person. Absolutely. Thanks very much for joining us online. Thank you also for sharing your views there. And you mentioned about, it's about touch and being together, and one of the important things here is that for me to put my hands together and applaud you for being here and for you being here. Thanks very much for joining us, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.